Is yours.
Well, hello. This is fun for me to be with you. I was telling Matt and AJ earlier, I don't get too many opportunities to spend time with UMC friends. So this is a real joy for me to be in a new space, connecting with you. I do have quite a few colleagues and pastors that I've coached and cared for, even here at the Kineo Center, that are from the United Methodist Church. So there's an affinity and affection for where you are and what you're going through. So it's good to be with you. We're going to try to bring together, I think it's possible, political polarization, fear, love, and pastoral burnout. We're going to try to weave together how those things are colliding at this point. I know they're colliding at this point because it's a big part of my own personal story. And in the last 14 months here at the Kineo Center here in Puerto Rico, we've hosted over 160 leaders who are coming with soul drain, with exhaustion, and with emotional injuries. And oftentimes they are connected to those things that we're going to weave together: polarization, burnout, fear, and love. And I want to start out with a story that is kind of comical, but really happened to me. One morning, I planted a church in upstate New York in Syracuse area. And 10 years ago, one morning on a Saturday morning, I was getting up 7 o'clock in the morning or so, and it was still dusk out, a little bit dark. And I walked downstairs to go to my kitchen to get a cup of coffee, to make the first cup of coffee in the morning. And I looked out our dining room window, and what I saw shocked me and made me fall to the ground. And I peeked up again, up over the window, so to see if what I saw was what I saw. And it was. I saw someone holding a gun, standing over the top of my, kind of crouched over the top of my fence, aiming it at my window. And I kept looking, and there was someone there right outside in my backyard over the fence with a gun. And I panicked, and I had my phone on me, so I called my wife. She was upstairs, still in bed. And I said, Tanya, I think there's someone outside. I don't know who, a stalker, someone that's got a beef with me. And she came down and looked out the window and looked at me on the floor and said, I don't see what you're seeing. And I said, honey, look, he's right there. She's like, I'm looking, I don't see anything. So I peeked back up again to look, and I'm incredulous. He's right there. She's like, honey, what are you? There's nobody there, Dan. There's nobody there. And so now I'm starting to get a hint that something's off. So, I start to peek up more and look. And then I stand up and I said, honey, you don't see that? She's like, Dan, you don't have your glasses on. And I said, so? She's like, are you that squirrel that's crawling along our fence with the big bushy tail? Is that the gun you're seeing? And she was right. I had interpreted a big squirrel that was sitting on our fence with a tail that looked like a gun, walking back and forth on her fence as a gunman. And, it was a bit humiliating. I realized, oh my gosh, I totally overreacted. This is what fear makes us do. It it surges in our body and makes us interpret things that are not there or may only be partially there. Has anybody ever gotten a phone call from a debt collector or a service that's saying that you have back taxes due? And even though you know it's not true, there's some like panic in you that maybe you missed something. Has anybody ever gotten one of those calls? Like, fear is powerful and it makes you illogical. It makes you respond in ways that may not even be true to your disposition in life. Fear makes us see monsters in the faces of people. It distorts our view on life. And I think that fear might be the most covert and powerful force on the planet. It is the raw experience of fear. It bands people together to take up a cause against another people. This is the power of fear. It has the ability to make people come together and work together. It's that strong of an emotion. In the early 1980s, a group of psychologists wanted to study fear's influence on behavior. And so they created all kinds of tests, but what they ultimately did was come up with code words for fear: hurt, danger, unsafe, peril, problem, injury, sick, threat. And they tested these words out in magazine ads and in billboards, and then would have a phone number to respond to. And this testing out of the language of fear, would fear elicit an action, created, I think, I don't remember the fullness of the report, but how many calls came in. Thousands and thousands of people responded to those ads. Then they used different words of hope, words of beauty, like possibility, connection, unity, love, and they put them on billboards connected to ads and responses in magazines, and they got very little response. And this research ended up becoming what is called the Terror Management Report. If you know anything about the Terror Management Report, it was published in the late 80s, and it's a complete report around how certain language elicits action out of people. If you want to say it this way, how it manipulates people to respond. The disappointing part of the report is that hopeful language of beauty and goodness, doesn't elicit that action. I'm disappointed by that. I don't know if you are. There's a sadness to that reality. Well, this terror management report ended up becoming in the mid 90s. Speechwriters for presidential elections took this terror management report and started using it as they would write speeches for presidential candidates. And in 2016, I'm just giving you a short history. In 2016, the terror management report was used specifically to write both the Democrat and Republican speeches multiple times. And so I'm going to just read for you the two speeches. And you'll hear like how terror is peppered throughout in both of their agendas. This is the Republican nominee in 2016. The attacks on our police and the terrorism in our cities are threatening our very way of life. Many have seen the violence in our streets, the chaos in our communities. Many have witnessed the terror of thugs and rapists and lawbreakers personally, and we are their victims. Right? You hear, whether you agree with that presidential candidate or not, you just hear in that speech fear, terror, and eliciting reaction. Here's the Democratic candidate. I'm the last thing standing between you and the apocalypse. Power over our bodies is under violent attack, and the only way to survive is if we beat back the deep-seated cultural codes and religious beliefs that threaten to enslave us. You can hear, even in that speech, the code words of terror. This is not about my affirmation of one candidate over the other. It's helping us awaken to how fear and threat has just taken over the way that we communicate, the way that we listen, the way that we craft getting action out of people. To feel angry and indignant and threatened is the shortest and quickest and easiest way to capture someone's attention. And what's happening on a political stage is happening in our congregations. It's happening in the Christian community, evangelical and mainline, across the board. People are tuned into fear daily. It's the bread they're eating as they scroll through their social media accounts. It's the news feeds that the cable news, whether that's MSNBC or Fox News, they're hearing terror all the time. And it is all for the purpose of eliciting a response, a quick action. And this is the context that we're pastoring and leading in. We're leading in this environment where people are being nurtured, and maybe even use the language of discipled by fear. There's a reason that Jesus, throughout the four Gospels, says 42 times, "Be not afraid." It's the most common phrase coming out of the mouth of Christ. I think it's because we have a problem with fear. There's an addictive quality to it, where we don't want to be afraid, but we are drawn to it. We are romanticized by it. We are fooled by the language of fear. This showed up in my congregation, in my church plant, in 2016 in a very, very visceral way. And this is going to sound kind of silly compared to what we're experiencing, now in 2020 and 21 and 22. Is one Sunday after our worship gathering, I had a woman come up to me, a dear woman who I love. And she said, "Dan, I think I need to leave this church. I don't feel safe here. I'm more conservative, and I feel like I'm being mocked, that I don't belong here. I feel unsafe being myself. I have to leave." And I remember the emotion that came out of me, and I longed, this is the pastoral heart. I longed for her to stay, I told her, "Lydia, there's space for you here. You belong here. You are loved here. You don't have to leave." I pleaded with her, but she said, "That's not true. I have to go." Fast forward just 2 weeks, I think this might be some divine activity. I had another couple come up to me, this time a couple, not just a woman. And the young couple, they were in their early 30s. And they said, "Dan, we're leaving. This is our last Sunday. We don't feel safe here. We don't feel like we belong here because we're progressive. And we feel like this is a place of compromise and complicity. And we don't feel like we're being heard, and we have to go someplace else that we fit." Same response I had. "You belong at the table. You are loved here. Your voice is valued here." And they left. And I remember that moment thinking, I really don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to bring two polarized elements together at the table. I don't know how to navigate this. And what it created inside me was this torque on my soul. As a pastor, I had faced a few smaller elements of this, but this was the first time I faced an existential reality. I don't know how to hold this together. I don't know how to bring people who both feel on the opposite ends that they don't belong and tell them it's okay to stay here, that they're safe. My words fell short, and then I started to experience a sense of grief and loss and disappointment, that I wasn't strong enough to fix this. Those two those two stories symbolized the whole culture of our church over a period of 2 or 3 years. People became so polarized that they didn't feel like our church was a place for them. And I didn't have a whole lot of answers. And the answers I didn't have also brought this sense of self-punishment that I had for myself, if that makes sense. I punished myself internally. I was my own worst critic, that I didn't know how to figure this out. And my presence, my compassion, my love, my care was not enough to hold people together. This is happening across the board in the church right now. I don't care if you're in a progressive church or a conservative church, there is a pulling apart and splitting and polarizing that's happening on a very ground level. And your role, the ministry leader, is sitting at the fulcrum of that pain and that splitting. There's very few roles, maybe the president, but not even my therapist are sitting in that role. I just talked to her a week ago. She's like, Dan, when I'm done at 5 o'clock, I clock out. There's a strong separation between her work and me. This is not the nature of our work. It is confusing. It is work. We are getting a paycheck, but we're also in family with people. And this splitting apart pivots at our role, how we hold the space. This is what's so profound about Jesus, is that Jesus, if we look closely at the socio-historical reality of what Jesus did, and you look at his disciples, he brought together polarized figures within his very discipleship core. People that loathed each other, people that thought there were extremely different fixes for overthrowing the Roman government, different views, the Essenes, the Pharisees, different zealots, the Sicarii party. All of this was represented in Jesus' discipleship core. And they all had different views on how things should be done politically and socially. And Jesus pulls them together. I call it a polarization busting movement. From the very beginning, he pulled people together that would have hated each other and not wanted to be in the same room. This is the pastoral muscle that Jesus brings from the very beginning of the movement. And we find ourselves in that spot where we're trying to hold space, bring together, knit together, compel people to love others that are unlike them. But polarization, in many ways, is the power and principality that we're slamming up against. I use power and principality because I think in many ways it's a demonic force. It ultimately tears and pulls us apart. And this is my definition of polarization. Polarization takes people that have something in common, emphasizes their differences, then turns their differences into separation, and then turns separation into disgust for each other. You can probably see the succession, right? It begins to take people that were together at some point or had something in common, and now they look at each other with disgust. And as a pastor, you're sitting as the fulcrum, the pivot point, the hinge point for that dynamic. When people face polarization, this is where it starts to hit the heart of the leader, the heart of your work, yourself, your very personhood. When people are in a polarized place, they begin to project onto the leader themselves. Projection is, I need to see in you myself. I need to see my wants, my needs, my demands, my opinions, my beliefs, my agendas mirrored in you. That's what projection is. It's a psychological term for how people want to see that in someone else, their leaders. The moment they realize that you are not embodying, you're not taking the side that they would take, or you're not reflecting it the way they think you should reflect it. People have three options psychologically. And this is what we see happening in congregations. People either move towards rejection. So because you are not who I want you to be as a pastor, as a leader, they move towards rejection. They abandon. It's a way of coping with not being able to control you or have you on their terms. They have to reject. Other people move towards ruin. And this is a different step than rejection. Ruin is, if I can't have you the way I want you to be, then I need to ruin your reputation. I need to put a mark on you so that people see you for who you are. The other third response psychologically is receive you as you are. They may not agree, or they may be frustrated that you don't reflect what they want you to reflect. But there's a sense of differentiation. They know that you are not them and they can receive you as you are. They don't need to contort you and distort you in their image. These dynamics are what is converging on pastors at this point. And here's, I always got to say this caveat, because I know the national news headlines that pastors are abusive, and that is true in some cases. There is pastoral abuse happening. We see it on large stages. We see it around, and I meet them here at my own center. But that broad brushstroke around the pastoral position is really just a reflection of what we think is wrong with Christendom. If the people that are at the center of leadership and preaching, then you must be the scapegoat. That's the response to our frustrations with Christendom. And so the response is rejection, ruin, or receptivity. And that dynamic, whether you feel it with fury or it's just a low static buzz in your church, will take a toll on your soul. It will accumulate a weariness and a woundedness and a weight that inside. You know, this is just some of the stats, and these stats don't even give life to the stories, but they just speak to this, what is happening with pastors. 48, this is Fuller Institute of Church Health Research just in 2018. 48% of pastors under 45 say they've considered quitting in the last month. 55 say they do not have a close friend. 72% said they struggle with ongoing anger because of ministry. And 6 out of 10 pastors say they are depressed. You know, those are stats, so they may not feel like they have a lot of life to them, but they do represent a signal that there is a weariness and woundedness, and we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to climb out and find oxygen and find health and find our feet again. This is my story. I pastored for quite a few years. I look young, but I'm a little older than I look. But the 22 years into my pastoral calling, I suddenly had a shake showing up in my hands. And I was on vacation, and my wife said, "Why are your hands shaking?" And I said, "Oh, it's probably just low blood sugar." But what we noticed is that the shake never went away. I still have it to this day. There is a tremor that was in my hands. And we started to get concerned, and we went to primary care physician, and eventually went to a neurologist, and I was diagnosed with CPTSD. Some people call it CTSD, which is cumulative traumatic stress disorder. And in all the exploration, I eventually met with a psychologist as they went through my neurology and they started to explore my story, is that the years of pastoral work, of the stress, the loss of friends and colleagues and people that I trusted, the slight paranoia that I wasn't sure who was with me, who was for me, the no-win situations of not knowing how, making a choice, and I thought it was good, but some people were offended. The constant turmoil of that environment. My body, not everyone's body responds this way, but my body responded with a stress disorder. It started showing up in my body. All those years, I thought that I had compartmentalized it and dealt with it quite well. It actually was just building like a well, filling up, and it showed up physically for me. My personality, I don't really, when I take a hit or I'm deeply disappointed or I feel loss or pain, I have a denial response. I'm fine, I'm okay, I got work to do. And that caught up with me, that denial. For some people, it's a distraction response. I just had a woman here leading an Episcopal church, and she said, Dan, I feel so much like failure and shame. I can't get my church. No one's responding to my leadership anymore. I know I'm not wanted. She's like, and the way that I'm coping with it is I sit down and I watch TV from 8 o'clock till 3 a.m. every night. And I've been doing that for 6 months. Distraction. I'm just trying to get away from it. Some people distraction shows up in different ways than that, but some people deal with the pain and the torque on their soul with distraction. Other people move towards defense. There's 3 Ds here that I'm getting through, is denial, distraction, and defense. I served under a leader who moved towards a defensive posture. He had, and I love this leader. He was a mentor for me, poured into me, but I saw at some point he turned into like an angry preacher, and he began to like be controlling, and you might even label, he started having some abusive leadership techniques. And it all traced back to, he had a executive pastor who cheated on his wife, who was a close friend of his, but the congregation blamed him, said, this happened on your watch. How did you not know this was happening? And he absorbed all this ire and blame that it was his fault that this happened. And because he didn't deal with the pain, the loss of his friendship, the errors of not knowing what he did wrong or how he did it wrong, he moved towards control and defensiveness and anger. Really just what happened is inside, he rose up and said, nobody is going to ever treat me that way again. And so he became aggressive and hurtful and manipulative. We all respond to pain differently, sometimes based on our personality and our histories. But this spot that we're sitting in, if we think that we're fine and we think that we're okay and we're just moving through it, I would probably gently challenge you that you are accumulating weariness and woundedness. It is not just dissipating in the air. It's in you. That story is in you. And then we end up leading out of those stories. An embarrassing example of how I began to lead out of my denial was, so this is slightly humiliating, but this is what happened. I had a friend that was traveling through town, and I didn't know it, but he decided he wanted to stop on a Sunday to hear me preach. He was traveling from Ohio to New York City, and he happened to be on a Sunday. He's like, I'm going to stop in and see Dan at his church. And I didn't know he was there until after, on Sunday morning, I'm sitting on my couch about to watch a football game, and I got a text from him, and he says, "Hey, Dan, I missed you. Great sermon. Sorry I didn't catch you. I was just traveling through, but I just want you to know, love the morning. It was great." And I felt horrible because I knew why he didn't see me, couldn't find me, because 9 months prior, I had asked my wife that after I was done preaching, if she would warm up the car and meet me around back as soon as I was done preaching so I could move through the back hallway and get in the car within 10 minutes and get home. Now, the reason I told her I wanted to do that was really wasn't super conscious to me, but I said, I just want to get home. I want to watch some football. I don't want to miss a game. But really what was happening was I was trying to avoid and hide because the prospect of being injured or critiqued or accused or someone projecting disappointment or dissatisfaction onto me, I couldn't face it any longer. And my body, in an unconscious way, was saying, Dan, hide yourself. And so that's why for 9 months, I remember one time, one of my elders noticed it and said, "Hey, you seem to be getting out of the building pretty quickly." And I was like, yeah, there's a game I want to catch. But he noticed something was off there. And eventually my wife did as well when one day she wasn't there when I got out of the building in 10 minutes and walked outside to the back door, and she wasn't there. And then she finally pulled up like 10 minutes later. All of this anger poured out of me. And on her, I said, "Where the hell were you? I told you to be," like all this rage. And I remember her response was like, "Whoa, what is this coming from? What?" And the reason that poured out in an unhealthy way was because I wasn't dealing with the pain in my life. And I was finding coping mechanisms. I call them detours to get around it so that I didn't have to face it. So I'm bringing this to you, and I want to create some space for Q&A. In many ways, my story is, might feel exaggerated or feel, like it's got a lot of intense features to it. But I think that there are elements of this in all of us. There's a torque on our soul that is accumulating, and a lot of it has to do with the projected expectations and the ways that we're finding the limits of our ability to keep people together, to hold this space for moving together. And we sit at that spot. So just wanted to share that with you. I've got nothing left to say. I wanted to create some space for interaction, curiosities, even some critiques, if there's some there.
Thank you, Dan. Let's open it up for questions. If you would please state your name and affiliation as you jump in to ask a question.
Hey, Dan, this is John Yeager.
Hey, John.
Hey, I have a question at the tail end of this. It's kind of about, I guess, where you think or where you feel maybe we are in history. To kind of us in the United Methodist Church, we're at a bit of a crossroads. I don't know if you heard.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a lot of historical crossroads type questions, but I was actually talking to my father, who was a minister for over 30 years in Florida. And I was talking to him about some of the things that were going on in church, and he just paused and said, "I don't know how anybody does ministry today." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, doing ministry, when he was in the 70s and 80s and 90s, he said, he turned to me and he said, "It was just easier." And it took me by surprise. It really took me
Yes.
off guard that he
Yes.
would say that.
Yes, John.
And so my question to you, I guess, it's
Mm.
historically, where do you see the profession uh, in that
Yeah.
crossroads of ministry and
Yeah.
maybe a crossroad with what's going on in the United Methodist Church? Sorry. Thanks.
Sure. No, that's great. No, sorry, John. That's good. It reminds me a little bit of well, it's completely related, but I was at a restaurant with some friends. We were sitting at a bar together, and we were watching a basketball game. And I was sitting next to another fellow that I didn't know, who didn't come with us. He just happened to be sitting next to me, and we started to, strike up a little bit of conversation about the game. And he asked me what I do for a living. I said, which I found myself, and I finally said, well, I'm a pastor. And his response was, sucks to be you. That took me off guard. And he's like, hey, listen, I'm not a church person. I'm not, a Christian, but dude, your role sucks right now. I said, why would you say? I was like, what's up with, he's like, dude, people think everything that's wrong with the church is your fault. So it's kind of a cruddy spot to be in. And I remember just hearing that from him was even from the outside, someone who's not a Christian sees that this spot that we're in is a very precarious spot. Culturally, have you heard of VUCA, VUCA is when these four social forces come together to create a level of panic and confusion. And the last time VUCA came together, and I'm going to explain what it is, but VUCA came together was right after World War II. And VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when those forces come together, it creates a collective anger and anxiety and antagonism. And then typically someone kind of enters in the scene and says, I will resolve all of that for you. I will be that for you. And a lot of sociologists are saying that this is like, we're now, the last time we experienced is World War II, but we're experiencing that now, this VUCA collision culturally. And the church, your church, is, in many ways, and this is where I feel sadness, is mirroring the culture in that we haven't really found a way to resist and rebel against the polarization. And we find ourselves sucked into VUCA. And so the pastor, John, to kind of land this, you are the scapegoat. You are the lightning rod for everything wrong with all of Christianity for all of time. That's what is at work within the collective body of people and culture, is that this is, if you're familiar with scapegoat theory within family systems, and Rene Girard, if you're familiar with his work at all, he's passed since, but we need to take our rage out. We need to cathartically release it onto something in order to feel released and satisfied about this VUCA place we're in. Someone's got to take the lashes. And so pastors are in that spot. I'm trying not to be too prophetically depressing, but we are in this spot. That's why your grandfather, great grandfather, I can't remember who the relative was, said it was so different. Was much easier because they weren't in that, their role wasn't positioned in that spot of scapegoating. Maybe on some levels, we know stories of church division where, catty stuff would start to happen and gossip, and they would, injure the pastor's family or the pastor. But we're now experiencing this on a cosmic kind of existential level. where if you're familiar with the fictional book, the Sin Eater, if anybody read that book, that there's this need for someone to eat our sins, to like absorb all that we feel disdain and disgust with, and someone will take that. And the pastor has typically been seen as the one who can take it. So I'm saying it's a complex time to lead. The response to that for me is one of doing the deep work of your own healing and your own emotional auditing, and not allowing that pain to settle in to yourself. You know, I'm going to just shoot straight with you. For like 15 years, when I experienced hurt, and I don't mean to cuss at you, but like, I just would bitch to my wife about it. I just kind of I just bitched about it. That wasn't dealing with my pain. It wasn't, I thought it was like, I'm getting it out. But it really wasn't healing for me. It actually wasn't excavating what was having, as the Apostle Paul would say, having mastery over me. So that to me is the level of movement and healing and renewal work. It's for a leader to not sit in that place and say they're fine, say they're okay, and to find ways to show up differently. But I hope that helps a little bit, John.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually coming up on year 10, and I'm kind of feeling maybe I need to check in on that. 100,000-mile checkup, as it were.
Yes.
So I was just resonating a lot. So thank you.
Yes, that's good. Anything else that sparked for you, you're wondering about? Does any of this resonate with you? Any pieces or parts in that? Oh, I think Paul is talking, but I don't hear any sound from him. Is that true, Matt? Is Paul?
He is not muted. Paul, could you speak up a little or get closer to your microphone?
I don't even think
We
he's
can
got
just
sound.
barely hear you. You can also type a comment or question into the chat if that's something you want to consider.
Well, since nobody else, I'm going to take up your time then.
Maybe Paul's crafted something that will come through. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. I've tried, especially over the past few years, to create what I've found. It's kind of going around is called a contemplative space, a space of that's supposed to be free of some of the sharper edges of the of politics. I was wondering if you had any advice on how to go about that. Some tips and tricks, disarmaments, ways to bring people together to have conversation. I recently did small group conversations, and that was better. But maybe how to do that in a pastoral in a church worship setting. Thanks,
John. What stimulated you to, like, what compelled you to want to create that? What was there
the political animosity that just started bubbling up. when we really started, I started seeing, especially Christians looking at each other and looking at others sideways, and
Yes.
suddenly there were enemies
Yes.
everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. This is an interesting stat, John. I did an 18-city tour. Now it's 2 years, more than 2 years ago, over a book I wrote called Love Over Fear. And I took a poll. I met with, in 18 cities, I met with 1,900 plus people. I had them take a poll in a survey. So I wanted to collect some data. And this was the most shocking. Now, this is my own anecdotal data, right? It's not Barna. But so I was in both conservative and progressive churches. And 74% of progressives feel like loving their enemies is complicity with injustice. When you talk about loving enemies, that's how it feels to them. 74% feel like you're asking me to be complicit with my enemies. 78% of conservatives feel like loving their enemies is compromising the truth. So you can see already that just the engagement with someone on the other side of the fence, or someone that's a couple degrees different than me, feels, like compromise or complicity, right? Those are really negative emotions to that work. It's only a quarter, only a 25%, at least those who I polled, who felt like that was something that they wanted to, that was endearing to them, that there was warmth towards. So the work you're doing, John, of like maybe cultivating a space to kind of move beyond this us versus them way of engaging. One of the tools, and I'm not trying to do more book promotion here, but is in my book, Love Over Fear. And I talk about attack. Our responses to politics and other people right now because of fear is really, we're given two options. It's attack or avoid. And really the third way is that we're being invited to is affection, or you could call it curiosity. This is the same thing that happens psychologically. When we experience an emotion that feels inappropriate, or, my wife would, if she was here, she would share, when I feel anger, there's this sense that she wants to stuff it and not be curious about it and just shut it down. And we are in this way now with other people, that we are not practicing curiosity or affection. I love the word affection because it's offering some warmth to move towards rather than to attack or avoid. And so in Love Over Fear, I talk about a framework of cultivating spaces where we are curious about beliefs that repel us, have a natural trigger of disdain. I facilitated, in New York, I facilitated a conversation between this, I thought it was going to be unbelievably explosive, but because of the way we facilitated and trained people in affection, I had a lobbyist for gun ownership and gun rights, and then I had a lobbyist for those who were trying to change the laws around guns. And then they had 5 or 6 people, and we hosted this public conversation. But prior, we did a lot of training around affection and listening. And the moral of the story is that 5 years later now, these two people are best friends. They're like, and they've actually softened a bit of their views. The pro-gun fella has just taken on a very different posture. And a lot of it is because of the facilitation of actually seeing each other newly. So another great resource is Better Angels, if you're familiar with that ministry. They do a lot of training and work around how to create these, curious spaces around each other. kind of breaking the polarization stronghold. So Paul, I think Paul threw something in there. I saw rise up.
Yes, Paul typed a question into the chat. He says, I have been in ministry for almost 45 years. I would appreciate some comparison of yesterday and today.
Mm. Oh, that's a great question. Well, I've been pastoring for 25 years, so my 10 years not nearly as you've been running a marathon, my friend. I ran a 10K, so it's not as long, but I do think the comparison would be that well, CNN put a report out on this years ago. The role of pastor is now more akin to the role of president, which is we either love or hate the president, right? That role in our society it's kind of always been that way. The pastor used to be seen as a caregiver, as a compassion worker. That's not the primary way people see the pastor any longer. They see them more as a politician than as a shepherd. So that's a strong shift just in the last 7 to 8 years. Some of the polling is how people view that role is more through the lens of a politician than a shepherd. And that has nothing to do with what you've done or not done. It's just the way that you're being interfaced with now. I think that the second piece that's very different is we've had 30 years of the church growth movement now, maybe a little bit more than that. And it hasn't accomplished what we thought it would accomplish. There's a sense of like, even the Reveal report that Willow Creek put out, the Reveal survey, if you're familiar with the Reveal report, they audited all Willow Creek Association churches and all their small group ministries. And the Reveal report exposed that I think it was like 11% of people in small groups have been discipled, know their neighbor. It revealed a lack of fruitfulness. And so I think that I think that we're church culturally, there's a reaction now to that didn't work out for us. And we don't really know. This is back to VUCA a little bit. The pastor, where are you taking us? I know what I don't want. I know what I hate. I know what doesn't work. Where are you going? There's a sense of demand for clarity that was never really that much of a force on the pastor, because before there was clarity. We go to church together, we sing together. There was a sense of like commonality in the structure, if that makes sense. We weren't questioning the whole entire edifice and structure of going to church. That's all being called into question right now. And so the pastor sits at that, again, here, this fulcrum, this pivot point of, what are you going to do about this? Do you have the answers for this ambiguity and lack of clarity and so that's a new challenge. And part of it is because of lessons learned, right? The mega church movement is dying right now. It hasn't created the disciples that we thought it was going to disciple. The mainline churches tried to do the church growth movement thing, and it didn't take over like they thought it would. Maybe they got a couple flagship churches, but we're all at a loss really for like an ecclesiology and a way of being the church that actually leads us towards movement. And so there has to be, this is the scapegoat mechanism, there has to be someone with the answers, and that's you. And, if we're honest with each other, we have some questions. we're struggling with absolute clarity. We don't know exactly where to take people, partly because this is territory we've never led in before. It's terrain that we've never walked on before. So that, I think those are two distinct differences in that role, as the way that you're viewed and the answers that are being demanded from you that you may not have.
Well, we are right at 1 o'clock. Let me say thank you to Dan for your time, for your perspective, and for your passion. And let me thank everyone who joined us today. I do want to remind you that Kim Ingram at the conference will be hosting a follow-up conversation for anyone who would like to do a deeper dive or talk further about resources or support. So be on the lookout for a link to join that conversation.
Thanks. It was wonderful. Great questions. I hope to see you in real time at some point. So thanks for having me and hosting me.
Thank you.
Be well,
Thanks.
everyone.